Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Inside Game podcast. Before I introduce today's guest, this episode is in association with Raymond Waters at the Old Coach Inn, Castleblaney. And here's a word from Ray's Tanning and Wellness in Auchnachoy.
Rays are the first on the island of Ireland to offer the Red Wave Pure Red Light Therapy Bed, a cutting-edge recovery tool now being used by top athletes worldwide. Whether it's muscle soreness, inflammation, joint stiffness or speeding up overall recovery, red light therapy is becoming a genuine game changer. So if you're training hard, coming back from a knock or just wanting to stay injury free, call into Rays and experience the benefits for yourself. Rays Tanning and Wellness, helping athletes recover faster, perform better and stay in the game.
Welcome everyone to the Inside Game podcast. Please remember folks to give the Inside Game a like, follow, subscribe on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Spotify. It really does help to keep the podcast coming. So episode number 17 today, and I welcome on a man who he's done it all really when it comes to being involved in the inner workings of Gaelic football teams, an inter-county footballer with Quirke, an inter-county manager with Laois, an inter-county coach with Quirke, and he's also the host of his own podcast, which I listened to a few episodes over the last while. The likes of Jason McGahan of Armagh and Kieran Donaghy heavily involved with Armagh as well, so look, well worth checking those out. So Mike Quirke, you're very welcome onto the show. How's it going?
Good, Gary. Thanks very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, suppose before we get into it, Mike, just in general life, what's keeping you busy these days?
Kids, man. Yeah, I pulled out of the kind of Kerry setup after 23, 24, after the Armagh game, after that semi-final. Actually, yeah, we took kind of a break from it. I had been doing it for 3 years. I had been in Laois before that, and I had been kind of managing my own club team down here for a number of years before that. And I have 3 young kids. I got twin boys and a little girl who are just very active themselves, playing a load of games, playing a load of sport. And I was missing a huge amount of that, really, you know, because, and I enjoyed it, obviously, being involved with Kerry and involved with the game. I love it. But, you know, I just wanted to prioritize maybe giving a little bit more time to my kids and my family. And I've only got a few more years. They're growing up fast, so their time of playing sport mightn't be as long as I'd like it to be. So for now, that's kind of, that's occupying the vast majority of my time for sure.
Nice, yeah. Well, look, Mike, a little later we'll talk about current Kerry and Armagh matters. We'll look ahead to the weekend's game in the athletic grounds. But before that, I want to ask you a bit about your time playing and coaching with Kerry, and maybe a couple of coaching-based questions as well. So, look, Mike, you were a player and a coach for a county that never really sits too far from the top table. You know, less successful counties, they have the demands of improving to become better and hopefully position themselves so that they can pick up provincial silverware or, you know, prolong their summers a little bit. But the demands in Kerry, they're very different. You know, the expectations on the players, the managers, the coaches is to stay there permanently. So, you know, what's it like in that environment as a player, and then, you know, a number of years later as a coach, you know, dealing with that demand of always remaining at the top level, always sitting at the top table?
Yeah, it is very, very different. And I think that contrast for me was probably really highlighted when I went to Laois and became the manager in Laois, because you get a real proper insight when you're in a different county whose, you know, priorities, not necessarily priorities, but whose tradition and whose expectations, I think is probably the right word, aren't maybe what you're used to in Kerry. And that's not a knock on anybody. That's just, it really highlighted for me how privileged, first of all, that I was and that we were in Kerry to, as you say, constantly be in the conversation to be one of the top teams and possibly reach a semi-final, reach a final, maybe win an All-Ireland. And if you didn't, the expectation was, you know, that you fell short of your goal each year. And then when you go to a different county like Laois and you're battling to stay in Division 2, and your every league game feels like a big championship game, the way it would do if you were playing with Kerry. It's a very different feel, not better or worse, but it's just really, really different. And you see where these counties are that don't have that tradition of winning and progressing to the latter stages of competitions. So the expectation in Kerry, and I think the pressure that comes with that is very much I know it's a cliche, but it's a very privileged position because, I was part of a group that, we got to several All-Ireland finals in a row, and for players partners, you're getting rewards off the back of that. I was never somebody that was one of the better players. I was always the guy that was, fighting for minutes to try and get on and impact the game and hang in there and stay involved as long as I possibly could. That was my kind of intercounty experience. I wasn't the guy that was, the Donaghy or the Goocher. Obviously, I was nowhere in that bracket. But to be able to hang in there with that kind of those guys and have the success and share that success that we all did for a number of years was, when you look back, you see how lucky and how privileged we were, and to go into the coaching and the selector side of it with Jack, it was a brilliant experience to work with the current crop of players that are there now, most of them, to see how they approach the game, how they approach their training and their improvement. It was brilliant. It was really taxing. It was hugely time oriented. That you were working another week really on top of your other week. But it was great fun, and it was just it was interesting to see the difference between our group of players and how our group of players approached it, to how the game has moved on to a completely different level now compared to what it was when I was involved as a player,
Yeah, excellent. Mike, a term I want to talk to you about is representative learning design. Now, for anyone listening who maybe isn't sure what that means, it's a term that would apply within coaching and within sports, whereby coaches will create practice environments that closely represent real in-game scenarios that the players will face during play. Or another way to look at it maybe would be that what the players practice and training is what they actually transfer onto the field to play. So, Mike, look, when I'm at the grounds and at the matches, I hear people shouting, things in onto the pitch, say like, just kick it into the square, for example, and I must admit, I despair a little bit, because the players, they're not in that mode. They're thinking of patterns of play, their runs, their cuts, thinking about, what they've practiced over and over again in training. So, look, how important is it, Mike, representative learning design?
Yeah, and to put it another way, for coaches, it would be using games as the tool to allow players to learn and to develop and to improve. We drills based kind of coaching and drills based training was all the rage, and it came from PE teaching. Really is where drills became the main facet of how do we teach people a skill, or how do we teach people to improve in what they're doing. And that then has transitioned almost exclusively to this idea of conditioned games, or games-based training, to put it in more simple terms for people who are coaching under 8s or under 10s or under 12s or whatever. And that's basically trying to put players in a position, and that can be from any age group. We're talking obviously about intercounty, but from the youngest age groups, putting players in positions where they're forced to make decisions that replicate situations that will happen in a game. So if we're working on a hand pass or a kick pass, no longer is that done in isolation, where we're standing behind cones and we're waiting for our turn and we kick a ball in a straight line. No, there is some form of stimuli or stimulus where there's a defender and he's maybe trying to do something and he's trying to block it. So the players have to make a decision about whether I kick it with my right leg, my left leg. Do I put it over him? Do I put it around him? So it's constantly trying to put players in positions where they're making decisions all the time, and you can see that when players get to a game in terms of intercounty football, what is the right thing to do in that moment. And of course they don't always get it right, but that's the way all that coaching at intercounty level has gone now. It's to try and make the players the best decision makers they can be. And obviously the skills are a part of that, but the skill development really improves with the decision making when that's a part of it. I can be the best kicker of a ball from behind a cone to another cone in training. I could do it 50 times and I might be able to hit the target 50 times out of 50. But suddenly if you put a defender in there and now I have to decide whether a kick pass is the right option, suddenly my accuracy now doesn't become as reliable as it was. So by microdosing that kind of opposition or decision making into it, now players are more adept at when the situation gets really raw in a game and things are frantic and people are shouting in, like you said, they're kicking in or do whatever, they make the decision that they feel is the best one for that situation. And I think that's a brilliant way that coaching has gone. I think kids from younger ages right up the way to senior inter-county guys, they enjoy that far more. They have more autonomy to make decisions. It impacts their motivation because they're the ones that feel now that they're the ones that are guiding the ship, as opposed to just listening to a coach or a manager saying, kick that, go there, do this. And that's like, for whatever age you're dealing with, that's what we want for our players, is to be enjoying it, first of all, to be developing their skills, and then obviously to get that decision-making piece into it is the big part.
Yeah. I want to talk, Mike, about the influence of other sports in Gaelic football. Like to me, Gaelic football was a sport, say, from the 1970s through to the 1990s. It didn't vary too much. I suppose taking free kicks out of the hands instead of from the ground was a big change. But in general play through those decades, we'd see a long ball kicked out from the goalkeeper, tried to win possession, one or two hand passes before there was a long kick, a lot of turnovers, very little emphasis on possession, 6 forwards, 6 defenders, 2 midfielders. But I suppose kind of from the 2000 era onwards, coaching became more prevalent. Eventually became much more prevalent. The game changed drastically, and for my money at least, it changed for the better. But when I ask about the other sports, a few examples I can think of would be, you see players screening a lot more in today's game, like the way basketball do, open up running lanes for the teammate on the ball, or how a play is dragged to one side of the pitch whilst a few other players sort of hold the line all the way over to the other side, waiting for the ball to filter over towards them into open space, just like you'd see in rugby, or even like the zonal aspect of defending, lines of defence that you see in soccer, rather than out and out man marking. So like, how much does study in other sports form part of the coaching remit now, Mike? Especially now that there's new rules as well.
Yeah, I think the best coaches are always looking to be magpies and to pick up aspects of different games, and not necessarily just different games from different teams. If you see, Armagh doing something really well or Dublin doing something really well, you try and pick those bits out and say, yeah, I think that kick-out routine might work really well for us, or I think what they're doing defending that is really good, and can we use that? You'd look at soccer, you'd look at all the different games, and you just pick the bits that you say, yeah, you know what, I can relate that to us here, and we may be able to do something, and that'll benefit us down the line. And I think that's coaching across the board. We're constantly looking at, can you tweak a little game that they do here in soccer and bring it into our training, and how can that help, and how can that freshen things up? And that is the way coaching has gone. And as you laid it out there, the game up to 2 years ago, up to the FRC changing the entire face of the game, had become without question more defensively orientated. And I think the coaching, I'm talking now obviously at inter-county level, the coaching had became conservative. It had become about, let's keep the score down, let's defend, and let's counter. It became almost like a soccer team going away, playing a big Champions League game in a hostile venue, and it was like, can we stay tight, keep it in the game, and then let's hit them on the counter-attack and get our scores that way. And that had become a kind of a staple of how a lot of teams were approaching playing Gaelic football at that level. And I always felt it's easier, and I think anybody can understand, if you've coached Gaelic football or coached any game, it's a lot easier to coach a team to have defensive structure, especially when you can bring 15 guys inside your 45-yard line, and then to coach, okay, we're gonna transition, we're gonna run hard, and we're gonna do this and do this. But it's a lot easier to coach defending as it is than it is to coach attacking, because defending, as you talked about a minute ago, is about structure, and it's about, can we shift and defend 2/3 of the pitch? Can we get good help side here if the ball is on the strong side? Can we just tuck all the way in and really condense the pitch? And if we do get bodies in here, we go and help and we double team. So it's a lot easier to defend because you're doing it without the ball, and it involves less of that crucial skill execution and decision making with the ball. So the attacking piece of it, I think now, is under the new rules, what we're starting to see coaches catch up with the environment that the new game has created. And it's about how can we, first of all, now transition the ball when we win a turnover and get it really quickly up the pitch. That's great. And then when we do have a slow attack, how can we set it up to make sure that we're getting really good, high quality shots, which both teams that we're talking about this weekend, Armagh being the top scorers in the league and Kerry not being too far behind them or scoring very freely. So they're probably two of the better teams that have adapted to the rules that, it's certainly in terms of attacking. So I think the coaching of this new game is still catching up, but we're seeing some brilliant results out of it already.
Just a shout out and a thank you to Raymond Waters at the Old Coach Inn, Castleblaney, for the continued support of the podcast. If you're ever in Castleblaney, or even if you're not, why not visit the Old Coach Inn for a fine dining experience and entertainment in their friendly bar and lounge. That's in the Old Coach Inn, Castleblaney.
Maybe we'll move on to Kerry and Armagh then. Mike, Kerry had a big win over Mayo last day out. It was fairly close at half time, but then Kerry pulled away and won by 16 points, something like 25 scores from 26 shots. And, it's worrying enough for the rest of the country. Sean O'Shea's 2-pointer off the ground from play was just incredible. I think the first of its kind, no doubt. And then more generally for Kerry, 4 wins, 1 loss, 1 draw. Maybe recap on that Mayo game a little bit and maybe on what have you made of the Kingdom so far in 2026?
They're very impressive. Very impressive also when you figure the amount of quality players that still have to come back into that team. Like you haven't seen Brian Begley, you haven't seen Gavin White, Paul Gainey, Dylan Gainey obviously was back the last day playing really well. There's just so many guys that have, Tom played his first game, Tom Sullivan. You haven't seen Diarmuid O'Connor. There's just a lot of guys. Paddy Clifford played 1 game. They have a lot of quality players that still need to come back into it, and they just look like they're rolling downhill at the moment. And what's particularly pleasing from a Kerry point of view is how the kind of new, less heralded guys have done in place of those other lads that I mentioned. The likes of Armin Heinrich at halfback has started every game and finished every game pretty much for the league, has had a really solid campaign. Keith Evans, another guy who has been there for about 3 years and never really got a sustained opportunity. And this year he has, and he's grabbed it with 2 hands, and he looked like a real frightening prospect, particularly down the line in the summertime on hard ground in Croke Park. If this guy Ed Worst is coming off the bench with 20 minutes to go with the kind of pace and athleticism that he has, he's going to be a real weapon for Kerry in the summertime that maybe wasn't there last year and adds another string to your bow. And I just think they're like the key thing with Kerry is David Clifford and Shawnee Shea are playing football at the very, very peak of their powers now. And like Shawnee looks to me like a guy who's just running far more athletically than he was maybe in the last couple of years. He probably had a few niggles and different things that he was dealing with, but at the moment he just looks like he's running so freely, and he's playing unbelievable football. I thought he was, I don't know, did he get man of the match the last day, but I thought he was incredible. Outside of the scoring of 11 points, his work rate, his tackling, his blocking down, he was just, and that score he kicked off the ground. That score he kicked off the ground is kind of, when you talk about coaching and maybe guys kind of saying you got to go down with that ball and you got to try and recycle it. Kerry are playing with such confidence. You can see they're just playing off instinct. Like that was pure and utter instinct from Shawnee Shea. A lot of times if your game's not going well, he's going down with that ball and he's hand passing to somebody else and they recycle and they get another shot. But everything is just off the cuff, instinct, free, and that's a really dangerous place for other teams to be looking at Kerry if the likes of Shawnee and David are playing with that level of confidence at this time of year on this surface and these pitches. I think Jack would be absolutely delighted that they're in real rude health for March.
Sean O'Shea, David Clifford, and Dylan Gainey, 222 between them, just frightening.
Yeah, like one wide, and I think David might have dropped 1 short. Out of 26 or 27 shots, and like that was there were tough conditions on Saturday evening. It was Saturday at 4:00 in Tralee. There was a strong wind blowing down the pitch. Kerry were against it in the first half. Didn't play well for the first 15 to 20 minutes. They didn't play great. And then they just took over around the middle of the field, which is probably the crucial piece for the new game is, the momentum swings that come with, the piggery of the kickouts and the breaking ball. And Kerry, to be fair to them, have done a really, really good job on that. Obviously the piggery thing was maybe tongue in cheek or whatever, but the skill, there's plenty of skill involved in timing. You're obviously timing for a clean possession, jump and catch the ball, but the breaking ball, Kerry are getting great numbers around both kickouts there, and that's not a fluke. That's coaching and that's organization to make sure that even if you're not in an overload, when the ball goes somewhere else, you're getting as many numbers around that ball as you can. And Kerry have done a great job of that through the league and have given themselves, a real lion's share of possession in a lot of games, which is a crucial part of it when you've got those forwards firing up front.
No doubt. Current Armagh were a team who had absolutely zero credit in the bank under Kieran McGeeney for a number of years. Narrowly missing out in Ulster finals, losing quarterfinals on penalties, added further to that notion that they were only ever going to be nearly men. But then, obviously, the big one came, the All-Ireland in 2024, fully stocked the bank reserves. And so even now, with 4 straight defeats in the National League, the general consensus among pundits, journalists, and podcasters really is that Armagh's stock is still pretty high. And, even if relegation was to happen, that come championship time, with the return of a few key players, the team will be just fine. Now, I share that belief. I must admit that sitting in Croke Park over the weekend, 40 or so minutes on the clock, Dublin 11 points in the lead, and Armagh black-carded down to 14 men, that even an optimistic supporter like myself was starting to waver a bit. Yeah, it was sort of hard to see just how it was going to come good. But Oisin Connolly kicked into gear. Oisin O'Neill, who came on to start the second half, he would have a massive impact. Conor Turbot introduced off the bench a little while later, would score 3 points. And then the likes of Greg McCabe, Tomas McCormick, Peter McGrane and Ross McQuillan, they went on to have superb second halves and make major contributions. Tiernan Kelly as well, before getting sent off with a double 2 yellow cards, sent off along with Brian Hard. He was having an excellent showing. But look, Armagh are currently top scorers in Division 1, as you pointed out. Third highest scores across all 4 divisions. But they have conceded quite a few goals, 10, which is in around the joint 4th most across all 32 teams. So I stand by a point I've made in a couple of previous podcasts that a few adjustments on some key personnel coming back into defence and Armagh could be back at business here. Look, did you catch much of the Armagh-Dublin match, Mike?
Yeah, I did. I watched it. I watched it on Saturday night when we got home. Yeah, and again, like everybody else, they looked dead and buried. And Dublin were saying, you were looking at Dublin saying, well, they'll do enough to stay up now, and it'll be a big win for Ger Brennan and his first year, and he's had a tough run of it so far in the National League, and they looked like they'd put in a performance that was good enough, because Armagh and Dublin looked like that looked like the crucial game, obviously, to see who was going to be the second team to drop, and it looked like Dublin, for all the world, had done enough. But I still think like in this new game, pace is so. Now, I suppose you could say in the old game as well, but it was different in the old game. If you had a situation where you'd 14 outfield players packed inside the 45, pace was not as dangerous a weapon, because if you beat one guy, chances are you're running into another guy, and there's bodies around the place. Like Oisín Connody's goal is a great example. And he left Merchant, who's a good player and he's really pacey. He was absolutely floundering, to try and get anywhere near him. And once he beat one guy, I know he had to jink past, I think it was at a midfielder maybe that was standing around the 13-meter line. But that was it. He had to beat one guy, and it was open country to a brilliant goal, obviously. And I think that's why Armagh are still dangerous. Now, defensively, there are issues, no question, that they're not as good defensively as they were 2 years ago in that All-Ireland winning team. I don't think, you're talking about getting bodies back. They'll have to get them back, because at the moment they are certainly susceptible defensively. But with the pace that they have up front, and that's why they're top scorers, because in this game, if we get a couple of bodies to stand in near the goals, suddenly there's less bodies on the perimeter, and guys like, Turbot or Duffy or Connolly, they can go around. McConville, who had a really effective game, they can go by people. And when you go by people now, you have scoring opportunities in front of you. And I still think that, and I'm not, like, the game next Sunday is fine. That'll be, that'll take care of itself one way or the other. But as the summer progresses and you get into better ground and on bigger pitches, I think the pace that they have in that front eight is still really, really dangerous, and disrespect them at your peril, I suppose, really.
Yeah. The sides have met 5 times in recent years. 2022, Kerry won on the Athletic Grounds in the league, and in 23, Kerry won in Tralee in the league. 24, Armagh won Croke Park in the All-Ireland semi-final. And then in 2025, Kerry took revenge a couple of times, really, in the league against Tralee, and then in Croke Park in the All-Ireland quarter-final last year. So that's 4 out of 5 wins in favour of the Kingdom. I suppose something that stands out, Mike, is 2024 Armagh had a great defensive structure in place. You've mentioned it already. They were able to curtail David Clifford and a few other Kerry forwards quite well, and eventually they would win in extra time. But then 1 year later the rules changed. We spoke about it, and Kerry got into Croke Park for the first time that season, and the whole pitch, the whole game just opened up for them. So two very contrasting games they were indeed, Mike.
Yeah, absolutely, and I can't overstate the impact that the rules have had on Kerry's fortunes. Like I'm looking at Kerry and I'm saying you cannot now. And again, I'm not specifically just talking about next weekend. You cannot now stop David Clifford in the way that you were able to do previously. You cannot load up 2 or 3 guys on him. You cannot, if you're his direct opponent. What we saw so many times with Clifford was his direct opponent. As soon as the ball is thrown in, if the other team win the ball, what's his direct opponent doing? He's running all the way down to the Kerry full back line. He's trying to drag David 100 yards away from the attacking area. So that can't happen anymore. The furthest David Clifford has to run now is to the halfway line and go back if he feels like it. So all his effort, all his energy, everything he has in his body is now focused on winning the ball in the attacking half and going at whatever defender is there in more space with less bodies around him. And that is the big difficulty that Armagh and every other team are going to have. Not just him, but all the forwards. Oisin Connolly has the same benefit that once Armagh have the ball, who'll pick up Connolly the weekend? Maybe it'll be Tom O'Sullivan or somebody. I don't know. Maybe Tom. Now Tom will find himself in a situation where he's one-on-one with Oisin Connolly, where if he gets beat, Connody's got a shot at goals, largely without too much trouble, because it's just so much harder now to help on the penetration. If you got, like, Kerry are really smart at what they're doing at the moment. They're putting their 5 or 6 guys in around the goals. They're putting in their midfielders, maybe a half forward, maybe a half back. So they've got 5 or 6 attacking players standing in around the large square. So Armagh will have to put 5 or 6 defenders marking those guys, which now means that there's only about 5 guys defending the perimeter against your David Cliffords, your Shawnee Shays, maybe a Paddy. Well, Paddy won't be playing, I'd imagine, the weekend, but whatever forwards, Dylan Gainey's. So your guys that are good at being able to take on a man one-on-one, penetrate the gap, and get themselves into 5 yards of space and kick the ball over the bar. And you're trying to defend the entire 40-meter perimeter now with 5 or 6 guys, because everybody else is standing inside the edge of the small square. So that's a complete change from what we saw 2 years ago in the old rules. And I think that's going to be the big challenge for Armagh on Sunday, but for every team down the line, is how can you possibly come up with a system where you're going to negate that somewhat? Or are you just hoping that those guys have a bad day with the boot, because that might be your best chance?
Yeah, I said it earlier, definitely worrying for the rest of the country for this year. But look, Mike, before I get a prediction from you, for the match on Sunday, Armagh have it all to play for, very much gunning for the win to avoid getting relegated. Kerry, on the other hand, are one of 4 teams who can reach a league final, and as we all know, no one ever seems too worried if they narrowly miss out on reaching a league final, which throws up question marks on how much Kerry really want to win on Sunday. So, look, do you expect Kerry to go full tilt? And David Clifford, he didn't travel to Donegal earlier in the year, but you'd expect him to play this weekend?
I don't know. Like, I think Kerry will certainly fancy a league final. Well, I mean, why wouldn't they? I mean, they're going to be heading off to Quinta do Lago in Portugal for a training camp. It fits in fine, I think, with the dates and everything, that the way that'll work out. If David Clifford will be there if Kerry want to get to an All-Ireland final or get to a league final. He may or may not start the game. Like maybe it's a case that you bring him up and you don't play him until maybe the game needs to be won the last 20 minutes or something. Not sure. Like David will want to play every minute of the game because he's just playing in such a rich vein of form that, the game is fun now. It's enjoyable for him. It's not any setback. And that seems to be the whole way that Kerry are. They're all in that kind of mindset. I think that the game is just a little bit easy right now for them. They're playing with such freedom and with confidence that they just want to play every game. So I'd be surprised if he doesn't play, given that Jack has obviously won a league every year before he's won an All-Ireland. There's a league title there for you. Anytime there's a medal or silverware or trophy on the table in front, as a Kerry person, you're always told you got to go get it. If you've a chance, go and play and go and take that away from you. So I think Kerry will be determined to win the game. I don't think their desire is necessarily as great as Armagh's, because they certainly don't want to go down, and I think they'll probably have more desire to win the game, obviously, based on that. The jeopardy is all on their side. If Kerry could lose and possibly still make the league final, but I think they'll approach the game in the right way. I think those young guys, like I mentioned, the Keith Evans, the Dylan Gainey's, if David and Shawnee are there, I think Kerry will absolutely want to go after that game and want to get to a league final, and then see where that takes them,
Okay, so prediction-wise then, Mike?
Look, I honestly think I'm struggling to see any team beating Kerry as the year goes on. And you might say, no, that's, but I was just looking at them on Saturday evening against Mayo. It just really struck me how many of their players are playing with such confidence. The young guys, the established guys, the Dylan Gainey, who just comes back into the team after winning a Club All-Ireland with Dingley, had his break, had one little game before it, and then he comes in and he finishes with 2-2. I think they're playing with a real confidence. Not sure how the game, that the tight field up there, we were up there for that league game, and it was a real battle. Clifford came on and actually got a goal, got a kind of a messy goal in the second half. Right. The keeper came out and he dribbled it over the line. And it was a real battle, and there was words at halftime, and it was a brilliant atmosphere. The crowd were on top of us, and it was a great game to win. And I think Kerry will approach that in the same way, and they'll say, we're going into a hostile territory. It's a must-win game for Armagh, so it's going to be a great test on a smaller, tighter field. It's going to be a great test for the young guys, and I think that's the way they'll approach it. But if David Clifford is playing, and if Shawnee Shea is playing, I would, I'd find it hard to see anybody beat them right now. But particularly as we get to Croke Park later in the summer, I'm going to be just fascinated to see how teams try and defend those guys. Or maybe like Armagh will do, can we just try and outscore them? Because you're not going to stop David and Shawnee and these fellas from putting up a big score. Can you put up a bigger score? Maybe that's the way teams are going to have to go about it.
Yeah. Okay, so you said you find it hard to see anyone beating Kerry, so I'm going to go for a draw, which means that Armagh don't beat Kerry, and then I'm going to hope that Dublin draw or lose to Galway, and that'll be enough to keep Armagh in the division for another year. So look, Mike, we'll wrap it up with that. Appreciate you coming on. That was a really excellent conversation. Great to get your insights and discussions about coaching and all sorts of things there. So Mike, really appreciate you coming on. Thanks very much.
No bother, Gary. Thanks so much for having me.